proposal that made it into a law that spent $2 trillion. And then we have just last week another bill the administration supports that enhances the deficit according to the Congressional Budget Office, raises the deficit by $400 billion. And so we have those two large fiscal pieces here. When Chair Waters asked, Secretary Yellen, when Chair Waters asked the chairman of the Federal Reserve whether or not spending more money from the fiscal house will improve inflation, I think what she asks, instead of improve, I want to translate for the public. When a Democrat says improve inflation, it means enhance or raise inflation, just to be clear, okay? So my friends on the left, when they say improve inflation, they want more of it. So, Secretary Yellen, to this point, now these things are imprecise, policymaking is imprecise, but back in February, there's an output gap this administration acknowledged, right, in economic projections, and came to Congress for a fiscal stimulus in the name of COVID, but a fiscal stimulus, right? Is it fair to say that maybe you overshot in February?
Well, I think it's fair to say that we had a sizable fiscal stimulus. We were very concerned that the most significant risk facing the American economy was a shortage of jobs and a prolonged downturn that would scar many people, particularly the most
in February, the output gap, right, versus what the fiscal stimulus was that your administration pushed for and got. Perhaps you overshot. Is that fair to say? Is that a fair assumption?
Well, I don't think that's a fair assumption.
It's not. So
Jason addressed what was a very substantial risk. And as Chair Powell just mentioned, the United States.
Okay, so you think that fiscal reclaiming my time, Madam Chair.
Now, look, the inflation.
I'm asking a very particular question about the output gap. The output gap at the beginning of the year was $300 to $400 billion, right? Economists on the left and right were saying that was about right.
I think it was extremely hard under the circumstances to have any certainty.
And I'm asking a very reasonable question. As a policymaker, as a policymaker, I'm just asking you, you're a noted economist, right? Who's chaired the Federal Reserve. You're now in a very different position, having to, I think, sell what is a pretty lousy economic agenda, but you're doing a great job trying to sell this administration's agenda. The economic question that I hear from economists on the left now is that, and your former San Francisco Fed even acknowledges that February stimulus contributed to the inflation we're now experiencing.
Well, look, inflation.
Is that a fair assumption or not?
Inflation is a matter of demand and supply, and it's certainly true that the American Rescue Plan put money in people's pockets, helped them meet expenses that they had, and contributed to strong demand in the U.S. economy. But if you look at the amount of inflation that we have and its causes, that is at most a small contributor. The pandemic and what it's done to supply chains, diverting demand away from services and massively onto goods, which has resulted in supply chain problems and the impact we have seen that's now been long lasting on labor supply due to the pandemic. I would say those are very important.
But there's a distinction here between a supply shock and a demand issue, right? Is that fair to understand?
The recovery plan did boost demand, and that's one reason that most households are in a favorable financial position, much better than they otherwise would have been, and it's enabled their spending. But the fact that the spending, because of the pandemic, has been so focused on goods as opposed to services has contributed massively to the supply chain problems
Okay,
that are
so-
boosting prices.
So, Madam Secretary, Chairman Powell, the Congress and the public and this administration wants to point everything onto the Federal Reserve on inflation. That is simply not the case. It is the multiple trillions of dollars that this Congress and this administration is spending that is putting jet fuel on the fires of this economy. It is making things worse. It is the policies of this administration. The chair went over time, and I'm going over time as well. So let me just say this. It is the administration's agenda here that I will finish my sentence here, Madam Chair, okay? It is the administration's agenda that is driving up the cost of things. It is making the American people worse off, not better off. Inflation is outpacing wage increases. This is on the Democrat House, Senate, and White House. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning.